The agenda this week examined the provincial government's new social assistance plan, captured some of the sentiments of Franco-Ontarians towards new and thus far unpopular provincial policies, and revisited recommendations to address the root causes of youth violence. The agenda's Week in Review begins looking at how Ford handled GM this week.
The story is people aren't buying Chevy Impalas and they're buying less Cadillacs, and that's what that plant is tooled up to do. And GM's trying to double down on electrification, and they're not going to do that out of Oshawa. Now, they could have maybe done that out of Oshawa, but they've chosen to do it someplace else in terms of where those cars are going to be made. So those decisions were made some time ago, but you know, the political trick of blaming current problems on the previous government and on the conditions that it may have set works for a certain period of time. It's going to stop working at some point soon. So the Premier can use this for a while, but he's got to start making an argument about why it is that they're actually, with positive results, opening up Ontario to business. And, you know, you can maybe pin this one on the last government. It gets tough if you try to pin the next two or three on the previous government.
I should ask Rob Benzie about this because, you know, you've covered transitions between one party governing and another. When does the period end at which you are no longer able to say, that was all their fault, we're the new guys here?
Well, I don't know. Kathleen Wynne and the Liberals were still talking about Mike Harris and the Conservatives 15 years on. So you can use that argument for a long time. I think Peter's right that it loses its resonance after a while. But to Melissa's point, this is something that was a decision that was not made. It's not made because Doug Ford was elected Premier, but it also wasn't made because hydro prices are high in Ontario, relatively speaking. Ford said yesterday that he talked to General Motors, and General Motors didn't mention electricity prices. They didn't mention the minimum wage increase. This is about a global restructuring. It's not about this, whether Ontario is a good jurisdiction to do business.
There's been a number of things that have happened in this government that calls into question its governing style. It's very abrupt. It has canceled projects suddenly. It has left many people in limbo, and I think its governing style is actually manufacturing a chaos in a sort of way.
I think to that point, I think that's part of why Tories are coming to us and talking about it. And these aren't rumors. We're not actually looking for this stuff. They're finding us with it, and the Star isn't the only outlet reporting the dissension in the ranks. The Globe and Mail's reporting it. You've had inklings of it in your pieces, Steve. There is something going on, and I think there is a lot of people around that party who are not happy with some folks in the Premier's office. Not with the Premier himself, who remains very popular with his caucus and his staff. He treats people very well. But his Chief of Staff, Dean French, is causing a lot of problems for the Premier. Him getting in a yelling match with Markham MPP Paul Calandra, who raised a very legitimate point about how come we're not in the loop on this as an MPP. You have to tell your caucus what's going on.
In a caucus meeting.
Yeah, in a caucus meeting. And then he got into a yelling match with him. Even Mr. Ford was taken aback at his own staff member yelling at an elected official. I've never heard of that. I know that every government, Marie would remember this, when the Premier's office staff would be mad at a minister or mad at an MPP, but never to in a quasi-public way.
Well,
like
let's
that.
find out. Was it ever the case in the caucus meetings that you attended or the cabinet meetings that you attended that a staffer for the Premier, Chief of Staff, Principal Secretary, somebody like that, upbraided an elected official in front of everybody else?
Not in the 8 years that I was there in opposition and in cabinet.
It never happened.
It never happened by a staffer. Now, did we argue with each other?
Sure.
Of course. Yeah. But never by a staffer. In fact, I don't ever remember staffers really speaking much in those meetings. It was the Premier and the MPPs in caucus, and cabinet and the Premier in cabinet.
For Mr. Ford, I think what's going on here, to be charitable about it, right, is that as everyone says, and it's reported in the stories, he's actually a good listener. He's attentive to his caucus. The issue is he hasn't been a parliamentary politician for very long. You know, Mr. Harris, from 1990 to 1995 was in opposition, got used to building up a caucus, bringing them along on their policy mission. It's a team sport. Mr. Ford came in at the last minute, and I don't mean that pejoratively, but he came in at the last hour, won that leadership of that party fair and square, and then was in a position to have to run right into an election. And I suspect what's going on is that he's just not culturally attentive to how much and attention a caucus needs and how open you have to be to your caucus. And to have a staffer upbraiding people during a caucus meeting when that staffer is not a member of the caucus is against the norms and is probably just against good common sense in terms of being a chief executive.
These stories about caucus, these stories about his chief of staff, act to delegitimize the premier. That's what I'm saying.
No, they don't.
And I actually think that he has a different style. I think that he's going faster than you probably expected that he's going, but he's doing exactly what he said he was going to do.
This backtrack, while saluted, was definitely not sufficient in the face of the fact that the French Language Service Commissioner was not gaining his independence back, and the French Language University in Toronto was not back on the table, which were the two most important cuts.
Serge, why do you think this blew up as quickly as it did?
Well, historically, Franco-Ontarians have never seen themselves as being a minority like any other, and they have historically tried to create societal institutions that permit them to transmit and produce culture and to maintain themselves in time. They've also have a long history of having to battle with the provincial government in order to maintain autonomy and governance of these institutions. We've seen this time and time again throughout history, and most notably in the Montfort fight back in 1997 under the previous administration.
Yeah, Francois, let's bring that up, because the Montfort Hospital, which is the French language hospital in the province of Ontario, in Ottawa, 20 years ago, the Mike Harris government tried to close it. The community responded. That hospital's still open. Do you see similarities between then and now?
There could be similarities. Actually, our guests can be better off to speak about that because that's more on the policy side and more of what the community will bring about. But certainly, the fact that there is a closure of any possibility to take care of the growing issue of the lack of post-secondary education in central southwest part of the province, which is the part of the province where Francophones are growing in mass numbers. We're growing really fast here in Toronto and the GTA, and we do have a lack of post-secondary education. So the cut of the French university is felt deeply. And for my office, well, I'll let others speak about that, but certainly the point to eliminate the position of independence, well, we had an institution, Franco-Ontarian have an institution now within the Legislative Assembly. It's not just symbolic, it's a question of being able to do our own, for the Commissioner to have our own priorities and to decide on our own budget.
So just so I'm clear, the fact that they have maintained your position, not standalone, but inside the Ombudsman's office, that's not adequate for you?
Actually, it's not my position. It's another position, because my own position, though the title seems to be the same,
it does.
It's not me. It cannot be me, because it's not just, I'm an officer of Parliament, and that position will be cut. Now, when they said that in the Bill 57 that all employees, which I'm not, will be transferred to the Ombudsman's office, then one of them will be, most probably, be the Commissioner. So it cannot be me, because I am not an employee of the paradoxically, I'm not an employee of the French Language Service Office, because I'm an employee of the Legislative Assembly.
That's right. You report to the provincial parliament.
Correct.
I understand. Okay. Serge, let's do, I would like to pick up on the Montfort example, because 20 years ago, when the Harris government tried to close Montfort, there was an enormous eruption, very much the likes of which we're seeing right now. In that case, the government of the day stood down and the hospital survives. What do you see happening this time?
Well, they stood down, but only after going through courts. Now, things have changed quite a bit since 1997, social media being one of the ways that people are offering up resistance and circulating ideas. There's also the fact that, contrary to 1997, where there was actually a board of individuals that were studying the services in the health services in Ontario, this government did not consult with Franco-Ontarians and did not consult with the population with regards to these cuts. And I think that's one of the sore points and part of the reason why people reacted so quickly towards this. And right now, people in the Franco-Ontarian community are trying to find a political solution in order to put this past us. Currently, the political solution proposed with the amendments are not cutting it. People aren't buying it. And I think the government will have to go back to the drawing board with that, because they may face, and this is a real possibility, they may face court battles in the future should the Franco-Ontarian community feel as though the movement is not significant enough.
let's get into something very ticklish here. And that is, it's almost 4 decades ago, when Ronald Reagan was running for president of the United States, that he talked about the so-called welfare queen who showed up in her Cadillac to pick up her welfare check. And probably since then, there has been a lot of, excuse me, a lot of allegations about waste, fraud, and abuse of the welfare system, and about how many people who are on it don't really need to be on it, but are gaming the system. There was never any evidence, incidentally, that that welfare queen of Ronald Reagan's actually existed, but the story was too irresistible not to campaign on. How much abuse is happening in the system today? Susan, start us off.
I'm going to say that there probably is abuse in the system. There has to be. Just because the amount of funds that a person gets, it's not, you can't live on that. The cost of an average one-bedroom house, one-bedroom apartment in Toronto is like $1,500. But the max you get total, this includes money for food and for clothing and other expenses, is just over $700. How can one survive on that? So unfortunately, people are looking for other ways, and that needs to be addressed. There needs to be something done so that people aren't looking for those other ways. They're trying to find work and stuff like that.
Okay, let me go to Deb Hutton next. When you were in government, when you were advising premiers, when you presumably had a chance to actually look into this, how much waste, fraud, and abuse was there actually?
Well, I'm actually going to separate them out a little bit, because there is fraud in the system, which is complete fraud. And I'm not pretending it's rampant, but there is fraud in the system.
Who's defrauding whom?
Well, I think there are people who make claims that aren't true, and that is true fraud. And again, I'm not suggesting that is a big chunk of the system at all. But then there is what Susan just spoke about, which is abusing the system because it allows you to abuse the system, because either rules are such a patchwork or our caseworkers are overloaded and can't actually make sure that the people who most need the help are getting it, et cetera. So that's very different than fraud. And I think those who work in the system would tell you that, for the very reasons Susan just spoke about, that is fairly rampant. Now, you can argue, you can argue whether or not it's okay. I argue it's not okay. The system is designed by government to work a certain way, and it should work that way.
But when I need to jump in here.
Okay,
I need to
go
jump
ahead,
in.
Barry.
Abuse is not rampant. What you have is a series of rules that people are struggling to understand, including the caseworkers. And the stat that is often brought up is the number of overpayments that are in the system of people owing money back to government. And they tend to conflate an overpayment with abuse or fraud.
Can you just explain how that works? Why would there be an overpayment?
The system is designed to generate overpayments. Any month that a dollar comes into a household that's on social assistance, that dollar is an overpayment that needs to be repaid in the next month. People have to report any source of income every month and report it in. And if it gets reported in, it's deducted from your next check. There are many situations where people report in sources of income. It doesn't get input into the computer. And then all of a sudden they owe $2,000, $3,000, $4,000. So these are errors made by caseworkers. Sometimes it's about different caseworkers having different definitions of how the rules work. One caseworker tells you something is okay. You get a new caseworker. It's like, oh no, that should never have happened. You shouldn't have been getting that money. You owe us $20,000. So that's how it works.
That much ever?
Yes.
That happens.
Sometimes 50. So this happens all the time. So it's impossible to pay back. But the bigger issue is, how often is government collecting money on those overpayments that are not actually owed? It's the computer that generates the overpayment. The computer decides whether or not you owe money. And the letter is sent out, is generated by the computer. Unless you appeal, I'm not sure any human being ever looks at those numbers to see if they're accurate. When you appeal, we discover that often those numbers are completely inaccurate and they get reduced or they disappear. Or it's an administrative error that the appeal tribunal will say, you shouldn't have to pay this because the system made a mistake. So I think, and if you don't appeal, I'm not sure a human ever looks at it, but they start collecting, and that's a collectible debt. So I would like the Auditor General to look at how often is government collecting money from recipients of social assistance that they're actually not entitled to.
These are the latest homicide stats, and the numbers on the numbers of shootings in the city. This is as of November 26th of this year, and this does include the Yonge Street van attack and the Danforth shooting. And we see homicides. You see what the average is. And the capital city is well above average right now in terms of homicides in the city this year. And if we flip to the next chart and we go to shootings, you can see again we're above average. Not as high yet as it was in 2016, but of course the year is not over yet. And we should also say this is not just a problem in Toronto. There are stats that say Canada's homicide rate last year was the highest it's been in a decade because of a spike in gang violence and a spike in gang shootings. John, you see these numbers. What pops out to you on those numbers?
Well, what pops out to me is actually the number of shootings. And we like to look at number of deaths, which is obviously important, but I don't think it really tells the full story, which is that since the year of the gun, 2005, the number of shootings have actually been increasing steadily. So while the number of deaths looks like a bit of an anomaly, the trend has been upward, and I think it's our inability to deal with that that's obviously a huge issue. And Mr. Curling's report, when I read it this week, it could have been written yesterday. Except for the social media bit that was missing. It was so relevant and touched on every point, in my opinion, that we're facing today that we're facing 10 years ago.
If you do the math, it's about a shooting every day. Is that just the new normal for Toronto and we're going to have to accept that?
Well, I don't think we have to accept it. Has it become the new normal? Unfortunately, it would seem to be that way. If you look at a couple of years ago, I think it said there were about 350 shootings.
Yeah.
So we're in that range, but it has been going up. The question is, how do we bring it back down? And I think that's what's the vexing issue.
Well, Annette, do we have to accept this as the new normal?
Well, I don't think it's... when I look at the graph across the years, I don't necessarily see that there's a significant spike in gun violence in Toronto. In fact, in 2016, we had more shootings than we have this year. And I understand that if we're looking at the numbers, it's only about 47 deaths right now with 30-something shootings, 300 and something shootings. But this is not something new. This is not an emerging trend. It's what's been happening in Toronto for many, many years. The issue is that the shootings are becoming more public. They're taking place in public spaces. So we're seeing that they're happening more, let's say on the Danforth shooting. If you remember back in 2012, the Eaton Center shooting, the Yonge and Dundas shooting. So this has been happening in marginalized, disadvantaged, prioritized neighborhoods for many, many years. And we've seen cumulatively over the years, hundreds of particularly racialized youth die to gun violence. Now there's a media frenzy because it's becoming more public.
It's moved into more public places.
It's moved into more public spaces. So the public think, oh my goodness, there's a spike, there's an increase in gun violence. But the numbers are not really saying that if you really track backwards. Statistic Canada has shown that in urbanized or urban cities, there's been cumulatively in the urbanized cities in Canada an increase. It says there's about an 80% increase. But if we're just looking at Toronto, there's a slight amount in the death that has taken place this year, but not in the amount of shootings per se. So you have to start to think about what messages are being sent through the media to let people get this idea that now we have to do something because gun violence is a problem.
Well, we got somebody in the media.
Been a problem
we got somebody in the media.
Years.
I hear you, but we got somebody in the media right beside you.
Yeah.
So do you want to pick up the story?
I think what Annette's saying is really important. I think when you back out and look at a 10-year or 20-year trend, you see what criminologists really call a peaks and valleys situation. And the only guaranteed thing that I've ever experienced with gun violence is that if there is a peak, there will eventually be a valley and we will return to a peak again. And I think that's because we still aren't doing something adequate about these root causes of youth violence. You know, talking to youth workers and social workers, they say all the time, you know, we tell people there's going to be another summer of the gun. It's coming back. We're coming back around again, but yet they still can't get adequate funding. They can't get resources or support from the government.
And that is the Agenda's Week in Review for this Friday, November 30th, 2018. You can see all of those conversations in their entirety on our website, tvo.org, on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda, and on our Twitter feed, that's twitter.com/theagenda.
The Agenda with Steve Bacon is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.